The blood on the porch steps had dried to rust by the time Violet Winters realized silence would be her only protection. Three men in black dusters had ridden up to her family's small ranch house just outside Idaho City. Idaho that scorching August morning in 1878, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, their intentions clear as mountain spring water. Her father lay bleeding in the dirt, her mother clutching baby Thomas inside the house, and her younger sister Sarah frozen beside the chicken coop when the tallest man leaned down from his saddle and spoke words that would chain Violet's tongue for months to come. He told her they knew what she had witnessed in town 2 nights prior, that she had seen them rob the bank and shoot the teller dead, and if she ever breathed a word to the marshal or anyone else, they would return to finish what they started. Her father would die slow, her mother would watch, and the children would be last. Then he smiled, tipped his hat, and rode away with his companions as if they had simply stopped by for Sunday supper. Violet's father survived, though Doc Hendricks said it was a miracle the bullet had missed anything vital. The physical wound would heal within weeks, but the invisible wounds that family carried ran deeper than any canyon in the territory. Violet found herself trapped in a nightmare where every word she wanted to scream caught in her throat like barbed wire. The marshal came by 3 days after the attack, asking questions about who might have done this, whether the Winters family had enemies, if they had seen anything unusual. Violet's mother lied smoothly, saying it must have been drifters, that they had seen nothing useful. The marshal looked at Violet with kind eyes and asked if she had anything to add. She opened her mouth and felt the weight of her family's lives hanging on her silence. She shook her head. At 19 years old, Violet had always been the talkative one in the family. She loved words, loved stories, loved the way conversation could bridge the gap between strangers and turn them into friends. She had dreams of becoming a teacher someday, of filling young minds with knowledge and wonder. Now words felt like weapons that could destroy everything she loved. She stopped going to church socials. She stopped visiting town except when absolutely necessary. She moved through her days like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, and even then in whispers and half sentences. Her mother understood without explanation. Sarah, only 15, knew something terrible had happened, but not the full truth. Her father looked at her sometimes with such profound sadness that Violet had to turn away. The ranch struggled. Her father could not do heavy work while recovering, and they were already behind on payments to the bank. Violet threw herself into the physical labor, hauling water, mending fences, tending the small herd of cattle they managed to keep. The work exhausted her body, but could not quiet her mind. Every night she lay awake wondering if those men would return anyway, if her silence was enough, if she should have spoken up and damned the consequences. She wondered if the teller's family knew who had killed him, if justice would ever find those men, if her cowardice made her complicit in murder. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the aspens dotting the mountainsides. Violet was in town buying supplies with what little money they had when she saw him for the first time. He stood outside the general store, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore a dusty brown hat, a faded blue shirt, and a gun belt that looked well used, but not for show. Something about the way he carried himself suggested competence and quiet strength. He was watching the street with the alertness of a man accustomed to trouble, and when his gaze passed over Violet, she quickly looked away. She was inside counting out coins for flour and beans when she heard raised voices. Through the window, she could see 2 men hassling a Chinese laundry worker, shoving him and laughing as his basket of clean linen spilled into the dusty street. The storekeeper muttered something about minding one's own business, but Violet's hands clenched into fists. She hated injustice, hated seeing people hurt, and the words rose up in her throat before she remembered she could not afford to draw attention, could not afford to be noticed or remembered. Then the cowboy moved. He stepped between the harassers and their victim with a casual grace that belied the steel in his voice. "That's enough," he said. And though Violet could not hear the rest through the window, she saw the 2 men's expression shift from amusement to uncertainty. to anger. One reached for his gun. The cowboy's hand moved faster, not drawing but resting on his weapon in a way that communicated absolute confidence. The two men backed down, spat in the dirt, and walked away. The cowboy helped the laundry worker gather his linens, said something that made the older man bow gratefully, and then went about his business as if nothing had happened. Violet found herself unable to look away. Here was someone who spoke when others stayed silent, who acted when others turned away. Everything she could not be, he was. The longing that filled her chest was so intense it hurt. She finished her purchases and was loading her wagon when a commotion erupted from the saloon. Three men came out in a hurry, and Violet's blood turned to ice. She recognized them immediately. The tall one, the one who had threatened her family, was flanked by his two companions. They moved with the confidence of men who believe themselves untouchable, laughing about something as they untied their horses. Violet's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the sack of flour she was holding. "Madam, you all right?" The voice came from beside her, and she turned to find the cowboy standing there, concern evident in his expression. "You look like you have seen a ghost." Violet wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to point at those men and scream that they were murderers and thieves, that they had shot her father and threatened her family, that they needed to be brought to justice. Instead, she felt her throat close up entirely. She could not even whisper. She just stood there shaking, tears springing to her eyes from frustration and fear and rage all mixed together. The cowboy's expression shifted from concern to something deeper, an understanding that this was more than a young woman startled by loud noises. He looked from her to the three men mounting their horses, then back to her. "Did they hurt you?" he asked quietly. Violet managed to shake her head, though it was not entirely true. They had hurt her in ways that left no visible scars. "Do you need help?" She nodded before she could stop herself, then immediately regretted it. Help meant questions. Questions meant answers. Answers meant death for everyone she loved. The three men rode past without looking at her, but Violet flinched anyway. The cowboy noticed. He noticed everything she realized. Those blue eyes missed nothing. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Ethan Morrison. I am new to Idaho City, but I am a fair hand at solving problems. If someone is bothering you or your family, I would be happy to help." Violet swallowed hard and forced words past her constricted throat. "I am Violet Winters. I appreciate your kindness, but there is nothing to be done." Even saying that much felt dangerous. Ethan studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could read the truth written in her frightened eyes and trembling hands. But he did not push. He simply tipped his hat and said, "If you change your mind, I will be staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Patterson's place. You or anyone in your family can find me there." Then he walked away, and Violet felt the strangest sense of loss, as if she had just let her only chance at salvation slip through her fingers. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual. Violet could not stop thinking about Ethan Morrison, about the way he had helped that laundry worker without hesitation, about the genuine concern in his eyes when he spoke to her. She wondered who he was, where he came from, what had brought him to Idaho City. She wondered if he was a drifter, or if he planned to stay. She wondered if she would ever see him again. At home, she found her father sitting on the porch, his shirt damp with sweat from pushing himself too hard. Her mother was hanging laundry, and Sarah was studying her school books at the kitchen table. Everything looked peaceful and normal, but Violet knew how fragile that peace was. One word from her, one slip of the tongue, and it could all come crashing down. That night at supper, Violet barely touched her food. Her mother asked if she was feeling well. Violet lied and said she was just tired. Sarah chattered about something that happened at school, and her father listened with half his attention, the other half clearly on their financial troubles. After the dishes were washed, Violet excused herself and went to sit on the porch in the cooling evening air. The stars were coming out, bright and infinite against the darkening sky. Violet had always loved the stars, loved how they reminded her that there was a vast universe beyond her small problems. Tonight they offered no comfort. She thought about the bank teller who had been murdered, about his family who deserved justice. She thought about how many other people those three men might hurt if no one stopped them. She thought about Ethan Morrison and wondered if he was the kind of man who could stop them. But involving him meant explaining. Explaining meant speaking. Speaking meant risking everything. The next day brought more work. Violet spent the morning helping her father with the cattle, though she did most of the heavy lifting while he supervised and pretended his wound did not still pain him. In the afternoon, she rode into town again, this time to speak with the banker about extending their loan deadline. It was a conversation she dreaded, but her father could not make the trip, and her mother needed to stay with Sarah. The banker, a portly man named Mr. Hutchins, listened to her request with barely concealed impatience. "Miss Winters, your family is already 2 months behind. I have been more than generous in my forbearance. If you cannot make a payment by the end of October, I will have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings." Violet's heart sank. October was less than 2 months away, and they had almost nothing saved. "Please, Mr. Hutchins, my father was injured, and we have had a difficult season. If you could just give us until spring." "I am running a business, not a charity," Mr. Hutchins interrupted. "End of October. That is my final word." Violet left the bank feeling defeated. She was so lost in her thoughts that she nearly collided with someone on the boardwalk. "I am so sorry, I was not watching." She looked up and found herself face to face with Ethan Morrison. "Miss Winters," he said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "No harm done. You look troubled, if you do not mind me saying." Violet did mind because she could not afford to look troubled, could not afford to invite questions. But Ethan's concern seemed so genuine that she found herself relaxing slightly. "Just some family business, nothing that can be helped." "Sometimes talking about problems makes them lighter to carry," Ethan said. "I find that keeping everything bottled up inside just makes the weight grow heavier." The irony of his words made Violet want to laugh and cry at the same time. If only he knew. "I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Morrison, but some problems are too complicated to share." "Fair enough," Ethan said easily. "But the offer stands. And please call me Ethan. Mr. Morrison makes me feel old." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and appealing. Violet found herself smiling back despite everything. "Only if you call me Violet." "Deal." Ethan glanced down the street, then back at her. "I was about to get some lunch at the cafe. Would you care to join me?" My treat. Everything in Violet screamed that she should decline, that getting close to anyone was dangerous, that the less people knew about her, the better. But she was so tired of being afraid, so tired of silence and isolation, and there was something about Ethan that made her feel safe, even though they had only just met. "I suppose I have some time before I need to head back," she heard herself say. The cafe was busy with the midday crowd, but they found a small table near the window. Ethan ordered stew and fresh bread for both of them, and when it arrived, Violet realized she was hungrier than she had thought. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, and then Ethan started talking. He told her he was from Wyoming originally, that he had worked as a ranch hand, an occasional deputy marshal, that he had come to Idaho looking for steadier work and a fresh start. He was 24 years old, had no family left to speak of, and enjoyed the freedom of moving where the wind took him. "What about you?" he asked. "Born and raised here?" "My family came to Idaho when I was 7, Violet said carefully. "My parents wanted land of their own. The ranch is small, but it is ours." She did not mention that they might lose it soon. "Do you have siblings?" "A younger sister, Sarah. She is 15 and wants to be a doctor someday, though my parents think that is foolish." Violet smiled, thinking about Sarah's stubborn determination. And a baby brother, Thomas. He just turned 1. Sounds like a good family, Ethan said. You are lucky to have them. The words hit harder than he could have known. Yes, she was lucky to have them, which was exactly why she had to protect them at any cost. But the cost was becoming unbearable. They talked for over an hour, and Violet found herself relaxing in Ethan's presence. He had a way of listening that made her feel heard even when she was carefully editing everything she said. He told stories about his travels that made her laugh, and when he laughed at something she said, she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with attraction. Finally, Violet reluctantly said she needed to head home. Ethan walked her to her wagon and helped her climb up to the seat. I enjoyed this, he said, looking up at her with those impossibly blue eyes. Perhaps we could do it again sometime. I would like that, Violet said, and meant it. On the ride home, she replayed their conversation in her mind, smiling at certain moments and then feeling guilty for smiling. How could she think about romance when her family was in danger? How could she let herself develop feelings for Ethan when getting close to him might put him at risk too? The three men had made it clear that they were watching, that any deviation from silence would be punished. And yet, for the first time in weeks, Violet felt something other than fear and despair. She felt hope. Over the next few weeks, Violet found reasons to go into town more frequently. Sometimes she actually needed supplies or had errands to run. Other times, she simply needed to see Ethan. They fell into a pattern of meeting at the cafe for lunch or taking walks along the creek that ran behind the town. Ethan never pushed her to reveal what was troubling her, though she could tell he knew something was wrong. Instead, he simply offered his presence and his friendship, both of which Violet treasured more than gold. She learned that Ethan was not just competent with a gun, but deeply principled about when to use it. He had been involved in several situations where he had talked his way out of violence rather than resorting to his weapon. A gun is a last resort, he told her once. Once you draw it, you have committed to a path that might end in someone dying. Better to find other solutions when possible. She learned that he read books, which surprised her. Many cowboys she knew could barely write their own names. But Ethan had taught himself to read as a teenager and devoured any books he could get his hands on. His favorite was a battered copy of Shakespeare's plays that he carried in his saddlebag. The old man understood people, Ethan said, all their nobility and foolishness, their courage and cowardice. Makes me feel less alone to know those same struggles existed hundreds of years ago. She learned that he was kind to animals and children, that he helped Mrs. Patterson around the boarding house without being asked, that he had given his last dollar to a widow whose husband had died in a mining accident. Everything she learned made her care for him more deeply, which terrified her. Her family noticed the change in her. Violet was speaking more, smiling more, seemed lighter despite their ongoing financial troubles. Her mother watched her with knowing eyes and finally asked one evening while they were preparing supper, "Who is he?" Violet felt her cheeks flush. "Who is who?" "The young man who has brought the light back to your eyes," her mother said gently. "I have not seen you this happy since before." She trailed off, but they both knew what she meant. Since before the attack. Since before the threats. Since before silence became survival. "His name is Ethan Morrison," Violet admitted. "He is new in town. He is kind and good, and I care about him." She paused, then added quietly, "But I am afraid." Her mother set down the knife she was using to chop vegetables and pulled Violet into an embrace. "I know you are, sweetheart. I know you carry a terrible burden, but you cannot let those evil men steal your whole life. You deserve happiness. You deserve love." "But what if caring about him puts him in danger?" Violet whispered. "What if they come after him to hurt me? Then he deserves to know the truth so he can make his own choice," her mother said firmly. "You cannot protect everyone by staying silent. Sometimes silence just lets evil men win." Those words haunted Violet over the following days. Her mother was right, but that did not make the choice any easier. She thought about telling Ethan everything, about trusting him with the truth. But every time she worked up the courage, she remembered the tall man's smile as he threatened to kill her baby brother last, and the words died in her throat. October arrived with crisp mornings and the smell of wood smoke in the air. The deadline for the bank payment loomed, and Violet knew they would not make it. Her father had tried to sell some cattle, but prices were low, and they could not spare many animals if they wanted to have a herd left come spring. They were going to lose the ranch, and there was nothing Violet could do about it. She was walking with Ethan along the creek one afternoon, watching the way sunlight danced on the water, when he finally asked directly, "Violet, what are you so afraid of? And please do not say nothing. I care about you too much to keep pretending I do not see your fear." Violet stopped walking. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment. She could tell him everything, or she could walk away and never see him again. Both choices felt like dying. "I want to tell you," she said slowly. "But I am afraid if I do, people I love will get hurt, have already been hurt." Ethan took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her cold fingers. "Violet, I was a deputy marshal for 3 years. I have dealt with dangerous men and dangerous situations. Whatever you are mixed up in, I can help. But I cannot help if I do not know what is happening." Violet looked into his eyes and saw only honest concern and something deeper, something that looked like love. She took a deep breath and made her choice. "The night before my father was shot, I was in town late. I was walking back to where I had left our wagon when I heard gunshots from the bank. I hid behind some barrels and saw 3 men come out. They were carrying bags of money, and one of them was laughing about how the teller had tried to be a hero. They shot him dead, Ethan. I saw their faces clearly in the moonlight." Ethan's expression hardened. "The bank robbery. The marshal said they had no witnesses. They came to our ranch 3 days later," Violet continued, the words pouring out now like a dam had burst. "They told me if I ever said a word about what I saw, they would kill my entire family. They shot my father to prove they meant it. The bullet missed his vitals by inches. Then they rode away, and I have been silent ever since because I do not know what else to do. If I tell the marshal, they will find out and they will come back and they will kill everyone I love." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she shook with suppressed sobs. "You should have told someone," he said into her hair. "You should not have carried this alone." "I am telling you now," Violet said. "But I do not know what good it does. Those men are still out there. My family is still in danger. And now I have put you at risk too, just by telling you." Ethan pulled back and looked at her seriously. "Describe them to me, every detail you can remember." Violet did, painting a picture with words of the tall leader with his cold smile, the shorter man with a scar across his cheek, and the third man who never spoke but watched everything with dark, calculating eyes. She described their horses, their clothes, even the way they moved. When she finished, Ethan's jaw was tight with anger. "I know those men. Not by name, but I have seen them around town. They are staying at the boarding house across from Mrs. Patterson's. They have money to spend and no visible means of employment, which made me suspicious from the start." "What are we going to do?" Violet asked. "If we go to the marshal, they will know it was me. They might hurt my family before they can be arrested." "We need proof," Ethan said thoughtfully. "And we need to make sure your family is protected when we move against them. Give me some time to work this out. In the meantime, act normal. Do not let them see that anything has changed." "Ethan, I cannot ask you to risk yourself for—" He cut her off with a kiss. It was gentle and sweet and filled with promise. When he pulled away, Violet felt breathless. "You are not asking," he said. "I am offering. Those men threatened you and your family. They murdered an innocent man. They need to face justice, and I am going to make sure they do." Over the next week, Ethan became a man on a mission. He made discreet inquiries around town, Learning that the three men were known in other territories for similar crimes, he befriended the stable boy, who told him the men kept their saddlebags unusually close and never let anyone handle their horses. He bought drinks for a loose-lipped gambler who mentioned seeing the tall man with a large amount of fresh bills the day after the bank robbery. Meanwhile, Violet tried to act normal, though her nerves were stretched thin. Every time she saw the three men in town, her heart raced. Once, the tall one tipped his hat to her, and she had to bite her tongue to keep from screaming. Ethan was always nearby during these encounters, watching from a distance, making sure they did not approach her. At home, Violet's father grew suspicious. "That cowboy you have been seeing," he said one evening. "Is he the reason you seem both happier and more anxious than before?" Violet decided her parents deserved the truth. She told them everything about witnessing the robbery, about telling Ethan about his plan to bring the men to justice. Her father's expression went from anger at her secrecy to fear for her safety to grim determination. "I should have stood up to them from the start," he said. "I let them make a coward of me. Let them make a coward of all of us." "You did what you had to do to protect this family," Violet's mother said firmly. "There is no shame in that. But now we have help. Now we can fight back." "What does this Ethan fellow need from us?" her father asked. "Protection for you all," Violet said. "When we move against those men, they might come after you for revenge. Ethan wants to make sure you are somewhere safe." Her father nodded slowly. "Your mother's brother has that ranch up in the mountains, about a day's ride north. We could take Sarah and Thomas there, say we are visiting for a spell. If anyone asks, you are staying behind to tend the ranch and livestock." It was a good plan. Over the next few days, they prepared quietly. Her mother packed essentials while claiming she was just organizing. Her father made arrangements with his brother-in-law via telegram. Sarah was told they were taking a trip and was excited enough about missing school that she did not ask too many questions. Baby Thomas remained blissfully unaware of everything. Ethan, meanwhile, had been working with the marshal. He had carefully revealed that he had information about the bank robbery, but that his witness needed protection first. The marshal, a gray-haired veteran named Tom Beckett, agreed to wait until the family was safely away before making any moves. Ethan also recruited two reliable men, former deputies he had known in Wyoming, who happened to be passing through Idaho City to help guard the Winters Ranch and ensure the arrest went smoothly. The day the family was set to leave, Violet felt like she was sending her heart away in a wagon. She held baby Thomas tight, breathing in his sweet baby smell and kissing his soft hair. She embraced Sarah and made her promise to be good. She hugged her mother for a long time, neither of them speaking because words were inadequate. Her father gripped her shoulder and said, "You are the bravest person I know. Do not let anyone tell you different." Then they were gone, the wagon disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust, and Violet was alone at the ranch for the first time in her life. Not quite alone, though. Ethan arrived within the hour, along with his two friends. They would stay out of sight, but close enough to respond if trouble came. That evening, Violet rode into town to set the plan in motion. Her hands shook as she walked into the marshal's office and gave her official statement. She described everything she had seen the night of the robbery in clear, precise detail. She signed her name to the document and accepted that there was no going back now. Marshal Beckett listened with a grave expression. When she finished, he said, "You did the right thing, Miss Winters. It took courage to come forward. We will bring those men in tonight. They frequent the saloon about this time, and I would rather take them in public where they are less likely to do something foolish. Ethan and his men will be there as backup. You go home and wait. This will all be over soon." But Violet could not go home and wait. She was done with helplessness, done with silence, done with letting others fight her battles. "I want to be there," she said. "I want them to see me when you arrest them. I want them to know I was not afraid enough to stay silent." "Miss Winters, that is not wise," the marshal began, but Ethan interrupted. "Let her come. She has earned the right to see this through." So Violet found herself standing across the street from the saloon at twilight, watching as Marshal Beckett and two deputies entered. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting on his gun. His two friends were positioned at other vantage points. The street was busy with people finishing their business before full dark. No one paid attention to the young woman and the cowboy standing in the shadows. Minutes passed like hours. Then the saloon doors burst open, and the three men came out, hands raised, with the marshal and deputies behind them with guns drawn. The tall leader was protesting loudly, claiming this was a mistake. They had done nothing wrong. People stopped to stare. "That is her!" one of the deputies shouted as something went wrong. The scarred man lunged for the deputy's gun. A shot rang out. People screamed and scattered. The tall leader broke free and ran directly toward where Violet was standing, his hand reaching for his weapon. Everything slowed down. Violet saw his face, saw the recognition and rage when he spotted her, saw him draw his gun. She froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then Ethan stepped in front of her, his own gun clearing leather, faster than thought. "Drop it," he commanded. The tall man did not drop it. He raised his weapon, aiming for Ethan, and Violet screamed, "No!" just as both guns fired. The tall man crumpled to the ground. Ethan staggered back a step but remained standing. For a horrible moment, Violet thought he had been hit, but then she realized he was fine. The bullet had gone wide. The other two men were subdued by the marshal and deputies. The street fell silent except for the ringing echoes of gunfire. People emerged cautiously from where they had taken cover. Violet found herself shaking so hard she could barely stand. Ethan holstered his gun and turned to her, pulling her into his arms. "It is over," he said into her hair. "It is over. They cannot hurt you or your family anymore." Violet clung to him and cried. She cried for the weeks of fear and silence, for the man who had died in the bank robbery, for the loss of her innocence and the weight she had carried. She cried with relief and grief and overwhelming gratitude. Ethan held her through it all, steady and strong, a shelter in the storm. Later, at the marshal's office, Violet gave another statement describing the confrontation. Dr. Hendricks confirmed the tall man had died instantly from Ethan's bullet. The other two men were locked in cells, and Marshal Beckett assured Violet they would hang for murder and armed robbery. "You are safe now, Miss Winters. They can never threaten you again." Ethan walked Violet back to her wagon. The street was dark now, lit by scattered lanterns. "I am coming back to the ranch with you," he said, "just to make sure there are no surprises." They rode through the night, side by side, not speaking much but comfortable in the silence. When they arrived at the ranch, Ethan checked the house and barn to make sure everything was secure. His two friends had already returned to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, satisfied the danger had passed. Violet stood in the kitchen that had been her mother's domain and felt the weight finally lift from her shoulders. She turned to find Ethan watching her with an expression that made her heart race for entirely different reasons than fear. "I almost lost you tonight," she said quietly. "When he aimed that gun at you, I thought—" "But you did not lose me," Ethan said, crossing the room to take her hands. "I am right here, and if you will have me, I would like to stay right here." Violet looked up at him, at this man who had protected not just her family but her words, her truth, her right to speak. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I love you, Violet Winters. I fell in love with you that first day I saw you shaking on the street, so brave and so frightened all at once. I love your strength and your kindness, your intelligence and your fierce loyalty to family. I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything. Marry me, let me spend the rest of my life protecting you and loving you and giving you all the words and freedom you deserve." Violet felt tears spring to her eyes again. But these were happy tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too. Ethan Morrison, you gave me back my voice. You gave me back my life." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan smiled. "I should go back to town tonight." propriety, and all that. But I will return tomorrow to help you with the ranch work until your family comes home. How long should we wait before telling them we are engaged? Violet asked. How fast can you send a telegram? Ethan replied with a grin. Her family returned 3 days later, cautious until they received word that the danger had truly passed. When the wagon pulled up and Sarah came running out to hug Violet, followed by her mother with Thomas in her arms, and her father moving carefully but steadily, Violet felt her world become complete again. Then Ethan rode up, and her mother took one look at the two of them standing together and started smiling. I see some things have developed in our absence, she said knowingly. Mama, Papa, Sarah, Violet said, taking Ethan's hand. Ethan has asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Sarah squealed with excitement. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Her father looked at Ethan seriously and said, Do you love her? Will you be good to her? Yes, sir, to both questions, Ethan replied. I will spend every day of my life making sure she knows how precious she is. Her father extended his hand, and Ethan shook it. Then welcome to the family, son. They married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Idaho City. Violet wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slimmer frame. Sarah served as her maid of honor, excitedly fussing with Violet's veil and bouquet of autumn wildflowers. Ethan's two friends stood up with him along with Marshall Beckett, who had become a friend during the trial of the two surviving bank robbers. Half the town attended, including Mrs. Patterson, who cried through the entire ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Ethan kissed her, Violet felt like she could finally breathe fully for the first time in months. They had a reception at the ranch with food and music and dancing. Her father played his fiddle, something he had not done since before being shot. People laughed and celebrated, and Violet danced with her new husband under the stars. Late in the evening, Ethan pulled her away from the crowd to a quiet spot by the barn. Happy, Mrs. Morrison? He asked. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Violet replied honestly. A few months ago, I thought my life was over. Now it feels like it is just beginning. We still have challenges ahead, Ethan reminded her. Your family's ranch is still in debt. We need to figure out where we will live and how I will support us. I know, Violet said, but we will figure it out together. And speaking of the ranch, I have good news I have been waiting to tell you. The bank robbery money was recovered from the tall man's saddlebags. The bank is giving a substantial reward to the person who helped solve the crime. Marshall Beckett said it should be enough to pay off my family's debt with money left over. Ethan stared at her. That is wonderful. Why did you not tell me sooner? I wanted to tell you on our wedding night, Violet said. Our life together starts with one less burden, with hope instead of fear. Ethan kissed her softly. I have been offered a job as deputy marshal. Beckett wants to retire in a year or two and thinks I would make a good replacement. It does not pay a lot, but it is honest work, and we could build a house here on your family's land if they are willing. They would love that, Violet assured him. And I could still help with the ranch. Maybe even start that teaching I always dreamed about once we get settled. Sounds like we have it all planned out, Ethan said with a smile. Not all of it, Violet said, feeling her cheeks warm. There is still the wedding night to navigate. Ethan laughed and pulled her close. I think we will figure that out just fine. They stayed at a hotel in Idaho City for 3 nights, a honeymoon that was brief but precious. Violet discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved and trusted was nothing like the frightening stories she had heard whispered among young women. Ethan was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When they finally came together completely on their second night, Violet felt a connection so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, lying in his arms, she whispered, I never want to forget this feeling, this absolute rightness. You will never have to, Ethan promised. I will remind you every day for the rest of our lives. They returned to the ranch and moved into the small foreman's cabin that had been empty for years. It was humble, just 2 rooms and a loft, but they cleaned it thoroughly and made it home. Violet hung curtains she sewed herself, and Ethan built them a proper bed frame. Her mother gave them spare furniture, and gradually the cabin became cozy and comfortable. Ethan took up his duties as deputy marshal, which kept him in town several days a week, but allowed him to help at the ranch the rest of the time. Violet divided her time between helping her family and starting a small school. She began with just 3 students, children of ranch families who lived too far from town to attend regular school. She taught them in the ranch house kitchen, and though it was humble, she loved every minute of it. Winter came with heavy snows that turned the landscape into a white wonderland. Violet and Ethan spent long evenings by their fire, reading to each other or just talking. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Ethan told her about losing his parents to cholera when he was 12 and having to make his own way in the world. Violet told him about the loneliness of growing up with few neighbors and how books had been her window to a larger world. "Do you ever regret speaking up?" Ethan asked one night. "I know it was terrifying and dangerous. Do you ever wish you had stayed silent?" Violet considered the question seriously. "No," she finally said. "Silence was killing me slowly. Speaking up, even though it was frightening, gave me my life back, gave me you. If I had stayed silent, we never would have gotten close. You never would have known to help, and those men would still be free to hurt other people." "You are remarkable," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "I hope our children inherit your courage." The mention of children made Violet smile. They had been married only a few months, but she had been feeling different lately. Tired in the mornings, emotional over small things, and her monthly courses had not come. She had not said anything yet, wanting to be certain, but lying there in Ethan's arms, she decided to share her suspicion. "About children," she said carefully. "That might happen sooner than we thought." Ethan pulled back to look at her face, hope and wonder in his eyes. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying I might be pregnant. I am not certain yet, but the signs are there." Ethan's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He whooped with joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down gently. "I should not be tossing you about if you are carrying our child. Are you happy about this?" "I know it is soon." "I am very happy," Violet assured him. "Nervous, but happy. You will be a wonderful father. And you will be an amazing mother," Ethan said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child is so lucky to have you." Doc Hendricks confirmed the pregnancy in February. Violet was due in August, the doctor said, and she should expect a hot, miserable final month. Her mother was thrilled at the prospect of another grandchild, and Sarah was excited to be an aunt. Her father got a little misty-eyed and said something about life continuing despite hardships, which Violet understood perfectly. Ethan became almost comically protective. He did not want her riding horses or lifting anything heavy or overdoing it in any way. Violet found it endearing and frustrating in equal measure. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I am not made of glass. You are carrying the most precious thing in my world besides yourself," Ethan countered. "Let me fuss. It makes me feel useful." The spring brought new life to everything. Violet's belly grew round, and she felt the baby move for the first time while teaching her small class. It was like butterflies fluttering inside her, and she had to excuse herself to cry happy tears in private. That evening she took Ethan's hand and placed it on her belly until he felt the movement too. The look of absolute awe on his face was something she would treasure forever. Marshal Beckett officially retired in May, and Ethan was sworn in as the new town marshal. It came with a small increase in pay and more responsibility, but Ethan took to it naturally. He had a gift for diffusing tense situations and earning people's respect. Under his leadership, Idaho City became notably more peaceful. The saloons still had their fights, and there were occasional thefts or disputes, but the serious crime dropped significantly. Summer arrived with scorching heat that made Violet's final months of pregnancy miserable, just as Doc Hendricks had predicted. She could barely sleep, could not get comfortable no matter what position she tried. Ethan did his best to help, bringing her cool drinks and fanning her with a piece of cardboard. Her mother assured her it would all be worth it when she held her baby, which Violet believed intellectually but struggled to remember at 3 in the morning when she was huge and hot and needed to relieve herself for the 5th time that night. The baby came on a sweltering afternoon in mid-August. Violet's water broke while she was helping her mother with laundry, and suddenly everything was happening very fast. Ethan was in town dealing with a minor dispute, and by the time someone fetched him, Violet was already in hard labor. He burst into the bedroom where her mother and Doc Hendricks were attending her, his face pale with worry. "I am here," he said, taking Violet's hand. "I am right here." "It hurts," Violet gasped between contractions. No one mentioned how much this would hurt. "You are doing wonderfully," Doc Hendricks said. "Almost there now. On the next contraction, I want you to push." The next hour was a blur of pain and effort and Ethan's steady presence. He held her hand so tight she thought she might break his fingers, and he whispered encouragement, even when she yelled at him that this was all his fault. Finally, after one last tremendous effort, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," Doc Hendricks announced, placing the squalling infant on Violet's chest. "A healthy boy with a good set of lungs." Violet looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known possible. Ethan was crying unashamedly, staring at them both with an expression of pure love. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him James Thomas Morrison, after Ethan's father and Violet's baby brother. Jamie, they called him, and from the moment he entered the world, he changed everything. Violet had thought she understood love before, but the fierce protective tenderness she felt for this tiny person exceeded anything she had imagined. The first months with Jamie were exhausting and wonderful. Violet learned to function on minimal sleep, to nurse him at all hours, to interpret his different cries, and know whether he was hungry or tired, or just needed to be held. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Jamie at night when Violet was too tired to keep her eyes open, changing diapers without complaint, and singing lullabies in a surprisingly decent voice. Violet had to put her teaching on hold for a while, but she did not mind. These early months with Jamie were precious, and she knew they would pass too quickly. She loved watching Ethan with their son, loved seeing this strong, capable Marshall become completely undone by a toothless baby's smile. She loved her little family with an intensity that sometimes scared her. As Jamie grew from infant to baby to toddler, life settled into new rhythms. Violet resumed teaching with Jamie often present, napping in a basket or playing on a blanket while she worked with her students. Her little school grew to 8 students, then 12. She taught reading and writing, arithmetic and history, trying to give these ranch children the same education town children received. Ethan continued as marshal, earning the trust and respect of the community. He broke up fights and investigated thefts, mediated disputes, and occasionally had to jail someone for their own good until they sobered up. It was steady work, and he was good at it. The town council increased his salary twice in the first 2 years, recognition of his value. The Winters family ranch stabilized financially. The debt was gone, the cattle herd grew, and they even hired a foreman to help with the work now that Violet's father was getting older. Sarah finished school and, against all expectations, was accepted to a nursing program in Boise. She would not be a doctor, but it was close, and the family was immensely proud. Young Thomas grew from baby to boy, following his father around the ranch and dreaming of being a cowboy. When Jamie was 2, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less surprise and more calm acceptance. They knew what to expect now. Ethan was still protective, but less frantically so. The pregnancy progressed smoothly until Violet gave birth to a daughter in late spring. They named her Grace Eleanor Morrison, and she was the image of Violet with blonde hair and green eyes. Now they had a son and a daughter, and Violet felt their family was complete. She loved watching Jamie try to be a helpful big brother, carefully bringing his sister toys and singing to her the same lullabies Ethan had sung to him. She loved the fullness of their little cabin, the noise and chaos and overwhelming love that filled every corner. 3 years later, when Jamie was 5 and Grace was 3, they finally had enough money saved to build a proper house. It went up on Winter's land, not far from the family ranch house, with 3 bedrooms and a real parlor. Violet cried when they moved in, overwhelmed by how far they had come from those dark days when she had lived in silence and fear. One evening, sitting on the porch of their new house, watching their children play in the yard, Ethan said, "Do you ever think about that night when those men came to your family?" "Sometimes," Violet admitted. "Usually when I am counting my blessings and realizing how easily everything could have gone differently. If you had not come to Idaho City when you did, if I had not found the courage to speak up, if something had gone wrong during the arrests, there were so many points where we could have lost everything." "But we did not lose it," Ethan said, taking her hand. "You were brave enough to speak when it mattered most. You trusted me with your truth, and together we made sure justice was served. Everything good in my life flows from that choice you made." "Everything good in my life flows from meeting you," Violet countered. "You protected my family, yes, but more than that, you protected my words. You fought for my right to speak, to tell the truth. To have a voice, that gift is more valuable than anything." Jamie came running up at that moment, breathless and excited. "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow? You promised we could when you had a day off." "I did promise that," Ethan agreed. "Early morning, just you and me. We will catch enough fish for your mama to make a fine dinner." "Can I come?" Grace asked, not wanting to be left out. "You are too little," Jamie said with all the authority of an older brother. "She can come if she wants," Ethan said diplomatically. "The more the merrier." Violet smiled, watching her husband navigate the competing demands of their children with patience and humor. This was her life now. This fullness, this joy, this beautiful ordinary domesticity. It was everything she had feared she would lose, and more than she had dared hope to gain. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and rewards. Jamie started school in town, riding in with Ethan in the morning and coming home full of stories about his friends and lessons. Grace proved to be as strong-willed as her mother, determined to do everything her brother did and refusing to accept that being younger or a girl should limit her in any way. Violet continued teaching, now running her school in a dedicated building that the community had helped construct. She had nearly 20 students at any given time, children ranging from ages 5 to 14. Ethan remained marshal for over a decade, becoming something of a legend in Idaho City. People told stories about his fairness and his quick draw, about the time he talked down a gang of rustlers without firing a shot, and the time he carried an injured miner 3 miles to the doctor. He never sought glory or recognition, but it came anyway, and Violet was proud of the man he was. When Jamie was 15, he announced he wanted to become a lawyer. He had been helping Ethan with paperwork at the marshal's office and become fascinated with the law and justice. Ethan was thrilled, already making plans to send him to school back east if they could manage it financially. Grace, at 13, declared she wanted to be a teacher like her mother, though Violet suspected she might change her mind a dozen times before settling on anything. Violet's parents grew older, her father eventually unable to do heavy ranch work, but still puttering around giving advice. Her mother developed arthritis in her hands, but remained the matriarch of the family, organizing Sunday dinners and keeping everyone connected. Sarah came home from Boise as a trained nurse and opened a small practice in Idaho City, partnering with Doc Hendricks, who was getting too old to handle everything himself. Thomas grew into a quiet, competent man who loved the ranch and seemed destined to take it over someday. Through everything, Violet and Ethan's love only deepened. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs, raised children, built a life. There were hard times, certainly. Years when money was tight, when one of the children was sick, when Ethan came home injured from his martial duties. But they faced everything together, and the foundation of trust and respect they had built that first autumn sustained them through whatever challenges arose. On their 20th anniversary, Ethan took Violet back to the cafe where they had shared their first meal together. It looked much the same, though the owners had changed and the menu had evolved. They ordered stew and fresh bread, just like that first time, and talked about everything that had happened in 2 decades. Do you have any regrets? Violet asked. About marrying a woman with so much trouble in her past? About settling down here instead of moving on like you used to? Ethan shook his head firmly. Not a single one. You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me. Idaho City became home because you were here. I would not change a moment of our life together. Not even the time Jamie broke your nose playing ball in the house? Violet teased. Well, maybe that moment, Ethan conceded with a laugh. But even that is a memory I treasure now. It is part of our story. Our story, Violet repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Do you remember how frightened I was when we met? How I could barely speak because I was so terrified? I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever seen, Ethan said. Scared, but standing firm. Protecting your family even at great cost to yourself. That is true courage, Violet. Not the absence of fear, but acting rightly despite it. Tears pricked Violet's eyes. After 20 years, he could still make her cry with his words. I am glad I found my voice again. I am glad I spoke up, even though it was terrifying. Because it led to you, to us, to this beautiful life we have built. They finished their meal and walked through town hand in hand, not caring who saw them being affectionate like young sweethearts. Violet looked at the storefronts and houses, at the people going about their business, and felt such gratitude for this community that had become home. She thought about that terrified 19-year-old girl who had stood shaking on this very street, unable to speak the truth. She wished she could go back and tell that girl it would all work out, that speaking up would save her rather than destroy her, that love and justice and goodness would prevail. But she could not go back. She could only move forward, carrying the lessons learned and the scars earned. She could raise her children to value truth and courage. She could teach her students that their voices mattered. She could love her husband and support him in making their community safer and fairer. She could live each day as testimony that silence in the face of evil was never the answer, that speaking truth to power was always worth the cost. As they walked home in the twilight, Violet said, I love you, Ethan Morrison. Thank you for giving me back my words. I love you, Violet Morrison, Ethan replied. Thank you for trusting me with your truth, for letting me protect you and your family, for building this life with me. They reached their house to find their children waiting on the porch. Jamie had come home from working at the law office in town, and Grace had been helping her grandmother with baking. Both jumped up when they saw their parents, Grace launching herself at Ethan while Jamie hugged Violet. We thought you got lost, Grace said dramatically. You have been gone for hours. Just celebrating, Ethan said. 20 years married to the most wonderful woman in the territory. That is a long time, Jamie observed. Do you think you will make it 20 more? I plan to make it 40 more, Ethan said firmly. And then another 40 after that if possible. They went inside together, this family that had been forged through hardship and sealed with love. Violet started preparing supper, while Ethan caught up with the children's news. Grace chattered about wanting a new dress for the church social. Jamie talked about an interesting legal case he had been researching. The ordinary domestic symphony of a happy family filled the house. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Violet and Ethan sat together on their bed. Ethan pulled a small wrapped package from his coat pocket and handed it to her. I got you something. I know we said no gifts, but I could not resist. Violet unwrapped it carefully and found a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. It is beautiful, she breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. I thought you might want to write down your story, Ethan explained. Everything that happened from that night you witnessed the robbery through to now, for our children and grandchildren, so they know where they came from, so they understand the importance of speaking truth even when it is frightening. Violet felt tears spill down her cheeks. It was perfect. I will start writing tomorrow, she promised. I will tell them everything about the threats and the fear, about meeting you, about finding my voice again, about how love and courage can overcome even the darkest circumstances. Make sure you mention how devilishly handsome I was, Ethan teased, trying to lighten the emotional moment. And so humble, Violet added with a laugh. She set the journal aside carefully and kissed her husband. Thank you for this, for everything, for being the man who protected not just my family, but my right to speak, for 20 years of love and partnership, for our children and our home, and this beautiful life. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me, Ethan replied, for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy with nothing to offer but his heart and his gun. You offered me everything that mattered, Violet said softly. Safety, and love, and freedom. The chance to be myself fully, without fear. That is worth more than all the gold in California. They held each other in the lamplight, two people who had found each other in the midst of darkness and built something luminous together. Outside, the Idaho night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Inside, the house breathed with the peaceful rhythm of sleeping children and satisfied hearts. The next morning, Violet opened her new journal and began to write. She started with that hot August day in 1878 when three men had ridden up to her family's ranch and changed everything. She wrote about the fear and silence, about meeting Ethan, about slowly finding her courage again. She wrote about the confrontation in the street, about justice being served, about falling in love and building a family. She wrote for hours, the words pouring out of her like a river that had been dammed too long. Over the following weeks and months, she continued writing whenever she had spare time. She filled page after page with their story, wanting to capture every important detail before memory faded. When she finally wrote the last sentence and closed the journal, she felt a sense of completion. This was their legacy. Proof that speaking truth mattered, that courage could triumph over fear, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. She gave the completed journal to Ethan to read. He spent an entire evening absorbed in her words, occasionally laughing or wiping his eyes. When he finished, he looked at her with such love and pride that Violet's breath caught. "This is remarkable," he said. "You have such a gift with words. Our grandchildren will treasure this." "I hope they learn from it," Violet said. "I hope they understand that silence in the face of wrongdoing is never the answer, that speaking up, even when you are afraid, is always the right choice." As the years continued to unfold, that lesson proved true again and again. Jamie went on to become a respected lawyer who fought for justice and fairness in the courts. Grace became not just a teacher, but an advocate for women's education, pushing for girls to have the same opportunities as boys. Their lives were testaments to the values Violet and Ethan had instilled: courage, truth, compassion, and the belief that one person's voice could make a difference. Violet and Ethan grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces gaining lines that spoke of laughter and sun and years well lived. Ethan eventually retired from being marshal, though people still came to him for advice and wisdom. Violet taught for over 30 years before finally passing her school to a younger teacher, though she never stopped loving words and learning. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, the family tree expanding in beautiful and unexpected ways. On their 50th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled their house and spilled out into the yard. There was food and music and storytelling, laughter and tears and countless expressions of love. At one point, Jamie stood and asked for everyone's attention. I want to read something, he announced, holding up the leather journal Violet had written so many years ago. This is my mother's story, the story of how she and my father met and fell in love. But it is more than that. It is a story about courage and truth, about standing up for what is right, even when it is terrifying. I think everyone here should know this story, should understand the foundation upon which this family is built. He read selected passages, his voice strong and clear. He read about Violet witnessing the bank robbery, about the threats and the silence, about Ethan's protection and love. He read about the confrontation and the arrest, about justice being served. He read about their wedding and the birth of their children, about building a life rooted in truth and mutual respect. When he finished, there was not a dry eye in the gathering. The younger generation, hearing the full story for the first time, looked at Violet and Ethan with new understanding and respect. Grace stood and said, Mama, Papa, thank you for showing us what real love looks like, what real courage looks like. You have given us an incredible gift. Violet, now 70 years old, but still sharp and vital, stood with Ethan's help. The gift was mine, she said, her voice still strong. I was given a second chance at life when Ethan came to Idaho City. I was given back my voice, my freedom, my ability to speak truth. Everything good that came after flowed from that. So I want all of you to remember, never let fear silence you. Never let evil go unchallenged. Use your voices for truth and justice and love. That is the legacy I want to leave you. The celebration continued late into the evening. Violet and Ethan sat together on their porch, watching their family enjoy themselves, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. We did good, Ethan said quietly. Look at all of this. All the love and life that came from us choosing each other. We did very good, Violet agreed. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, and thought about that frightened girl she had been 50 years ago. She wished she could tell that girl that everything would be more than all right, that happiness and fulfillment beyond imagining waited just around the corner. She wished she could tell her that the cowboy with the kind eyes would become her whole world, that speaking truth would save her rather than destroy her. But she did not need to tell her. She had lived it. She had become the woman that frightened girl could only dream of being. She had found her voice and her love and her purpose. She had protected her family by speaking up rather than staying silent. She had built a beautiful life on a foundation of truth and courage. As the stars came out and the sounds of celebration continued around them, Violet squeezed Ethan's hand. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for hearing me when I was silent, for loving me through everything. Thank you for letting me, Ethan replied, for trusting me with your heart and your truth, for 50 years of partnership and love, for this incredible family we created together. They sat in peaceful silence, two old souls who had weathered every storm together and emerged stronger. The house behind them glowed with light and life, filled with the evidence of their love. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the lessons they had taught. Speak truth, act with courage, love fiercely, protect the vulnerable, and never let fear win. As Violet drifted off to sleep that night, curled against Ethan in the bed they had shared for 5 decades, she felt complete. Her life had been full of purpose and meaning. She had been loved and had loved in return. She had made a difference, however small, in the world around her. And it had all started with finding the courage to speak, to break her silence, to trust a cowboy with kind eyes who had promised to protect her family and her words. He had kept that promise every single day since, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift possible, a life lived fully, without fear, rich with love and purpose. It was, Violet thought as sleep claimed her, everything she had ever wanted and more than she had dared to dream possible. Their story had a happy ending after all, the kind that only came from choosing courage over fear, truth over silence, and love over everything else. And that, she knew, was exactly how it should be.